Have you ever trusted someone completely, only to discover they betrayed you in the most intimate way possible? Maybe it was a doctor, a therapist, someone who had access to your most vulnerable moments. If you're watching from anywhere in the United States, I want you to think about this. How many professionals have you trusted with your body, your secrets, your privacy? Drop your state in the comments if you've ever felt that sickening moment when you realized someone you trusted had violated that sacred space. Natasha Chun had always been careful about trust. At 28, she'd learned the hard way that people weren't always what they seemed. Her ex-boyfriend had spent 2 years systematically dismantling her confidence, convincing her that her instincts were wrong, that she was overreacting, that she should be grateful for his attention. When she finally left him 6 months ago, she'd moved from Seattle to Chicago specifically for the fresh start, for the chance to rebuild herself in a city where no one knew her history. She'd done well, actually, better than she'd expected. Her job as a physical therapist at Premier Wellness Center paid enough for a modest one-bedroom apartment in a decent neighborhood. The work itself was fulfilling, helping people regain mobility and strength after injuries or surgeries. She was good at it, patient and intuitive, able to read body language and adjust her approach to each client's needs. Her colleagues respected her. Her clients requested her specifically. For the first time in years, Natasha felt like she was building something solid, which was why 3 months ago, when she'd needed to establish care with a new primary physician, she'd asked her coworker Miranda for a recommendation. Miranda had immediately suggested Dr. Richard Brennan, said he was thorough and professional, that half the staff at Premier Wellness used him. The practice was in a nice building downtown, modern and clean, the kind of place that radiated competence and success. Natasha remembered that appointment with crystal clarity now. The way Dr. Brennan had been friendly but not overly familiar, his manner brisk and efficient. He was probably in his early 50s, graying at the temples, wedding ring on his left hand, framed photos of smiling children on his desk. Everything about him had screamed safe, trustworthy, respectable. When he'd explained that he liked to maintain comprehensive photographic records for his files, Natasha had felt a flutter of discomfort. "Is that normal?" she'd asked. "Absolutely," he'd assured her, "especially for baseline documentation. Insurance companies love thorough records, and it protects both of us if there's ever a question about your medical history." He'd handed her a clipboard thick with forms, and somewhere in those pages, buried in dense legal language, there had probably been consent for the photographs. She'd signed without reading carefully, the way everyone did, trusting that a licensed physician wouldn't ask her to agree to anything inappropriate. The actual photo session had been clinical. He'd had a nurse present, which had made Natasha feel better. The images were for records, he'd said, positioning her for various angles. She'd been in a medical gown, but some of the photos had required the gown to be adjusted or removed for documentation of skin condition, he'd explained. It had felt invasive and uncomfortable, but Natasha had told herself she was being paranoid, that this was standard medical practice, that her instincts were wrong again, just like her ex had always said. She'd left that appointment feeling vaguely unsettled, but convincing herself it was fine. Dr. Brennan was a respected physician. Miranda had recommended him. The practice had good reviews online. Natasha's discomfort was her own baggage, not reality. For 3 months, she'd managed not to think about it much. Until today, Natasha had been at Premier Wellness Center, finishing up with her last client of the afternoon. Mrs. Patterson, a sweet 72-year-old recovering from a hip replacement, had made excellent progress, and Natasha had been riding the high of a successful session. She'd been gathering her notes, planning to head home for a quiet evening, maybe order Thai food and watch something mindless on Netflix. The front desk had called her extension. "Miss Chun, we have a VIP client in Private Suite 3 who requested immediate assistance." He strained his shoulder, needs assessment. Natasha had grabbed her tablet and headed down the hall, not thinking much of it. Premier Wellness catered to wealthy clients, and VIP sessions in the private suites were common enough. She'd knocked once on Suite 3's door, waited a beat, then pushed it open. The scene inside had made her freeze instantly. For men in expensive suits stood around the room's conference table, not its massage table. This wasn't a therapy session at all. Papers were spread across the polished wood surface, and the men had all turned to stare at her sudden intrusion. The atmosphere was wrong. charged with tension that had nothing to do with medical treatment. "I'm so sorry," Natasha had started, already backing toward the door. "I was told someone needed physical therapy. I must have the wrong room." The man at the head of the table had been the one to capture her attention completely. He was tall, probably 6'1" or 6'2", with dark hair styled with careless precision and pale blue eyes that were currently fixed on her with startling intensity. He was younger than she'd expected given his obvious authority, maybe mid-30s, with sharp Slavic features and the kind of presence that made the air feel heavier. His suit was impeccable, charcoal gray with subtle pinstripe, the kind of tailoring that cost thousands of dollars. When he spoke, his voice carried a faint Russian accent, smooth and controlled. "No one called for therapy, but since you're here, close the door." It wasn't a request. The three other men had shifted positions slightly, and Natasha's pulse had spiked with the first real flutter of fear. She should leave. She should definitely leave right now. But then her eyes had caught on the papers spread across that table, and her entire world had shattered. Photos. Dozens of photos scattered among what looked like financial documents and typed lists. And she recognized the body in those images because it was hers. The medical gown. Her face, clearly visible in several shots. Her body exposed in ways that made her skin crawl with remembered vulnerability. Different angles, different poses, the exact images from Dr. Brennan's examination room 3 months ago. The sound that escaped her throat was barely human. Viktor Volkov had seen many reactions in his line of work. Fear, anger, defiance, false bravado. But the raw devastation that had just torn across the young woman's face was something different entirely, something that sent immediate warning signals firing through his brain. She was staring at the photographs spread across his table with an expression of such visceral horror that Victor's first instinct was to step between her and whatever had caused it. His second instinct was to follow her gaze and understand what he was looking at. The photos had been part of a package deal he'd purchased 2 weeks ago from a contact who specialized in private acquisitions. Victor collected certain items, information mostly, things that might prove useful for leverage or investment. This particular batch had been described as exclusive medical documentation, potentially valuable for insurance fraud schemes or blackmail if needed. He'd barely glanced at them before this meeting, had been more interested in the corporate financial records his team had compiled. Now, looking at the images with new eyes, Victor saw what he'd missed. These weren't generic medical photos. These were intimate, exploitative, and the woman standing frozen in his doorway was staring at her own violations spread out like trading cards. "Where did you get those?" she whispered. The words came out strangled, barely audible. "Where did you get those photos?" Victor's mind worked quickly, piecing together implications. One of his men, Dmitri, moved toward her as if to escort her out, but Victor held up a hand sharply. "Stop." He moved around the table, careful not to crowd her, and gathered the photos quickly, flipping them face down. The woman flinched at his movement, but didn't run. She seemed paralyzed, her dark eyes wide with shock and something that looked like soul-deep betrayal. Victor examined her more carefully now. She was petite, maybe 5'3", with glossy black hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Asian features, mid to late 20s, wearing athletic wear with a premier wellness center logo. She was beautiful in an understated way, but what struck him most was the absolute devastation radiating from her. "What's your name?" Victor asked quietly. His tone had shifted entirely from the cold authority of moments before. She blinked, seeming to surface from shock. "Natasha. Natasha Chun. Those photos, there." She stopped, swallowed hard. "They're of me. From my doctor's office." He said they were for records. Something cold and dangerous settled in Victor's chest. He knew exactly what this meant, the kind of operation that would photograph vulnerable women under the guise of medical necessity and then sell those images. He'd encountered similar schemes before, usually shut them down immediately when they came to his attention. The fact that he'd unknowingly purchased the product of one made his jaw clench with controlled fury. "Who's your doctor?" he asked. The question came out harder than he'd intended. Natasha was trembling now, he noticed. "Dr. Richard Brennan. Downtown." She pressed her hand to her mouth, and Victor could see her fighting for composure. "I signed consent forms. He said it was standard." I trusted him. Victor turned to Dmitri, switching to Russian. "Find everything about Richard Brennan immediately." "Doctor," Downtown Chicago. I want his location, his associates, his finances, and whoever sold me these photos within the hour." Dmitri nodded and pulled out his phone, already moving toward the door. The other two men in the room, Alexei and Roman, were watching the exchange with growing understanding. They knew Victor's reputation. They knew his particular hatred for men who preyed on vulnerable people, especially women. This situation had just become personal. Victor looked back at Natasha, who was still standing in the doorway like she might collapse at any moment. "You need to sit down," he said, gentler now. "You're in shock." She shook her head violently. "I need to go. I need to call the police. I need to." Her voice broke. "Oh my God. How many? How many photos did you buy? Who else has seen them?" Victor gestured to a chair, but she didn't move. He kept his distance, reading her body language, seeing the barely controlled panic. "I purchased a collection of 53 images 2 weeks ago," he said, deciding brutal honesty was better than evasion. "I haven't distributed them. They've been in my possession only. But the man I bought them from," he paused, considering how much to reveal, "he sells to multiple buyers." Natasha made a sound like she'd been punched. Her knees seemed to weaken, and this time when Victor gestured to the chair, she stumbled toward it and sat heavily. Victor moved to the small bar in the corner of the suite and poured 2 fingers of vodka into a glass. He brought it to her, crouching down to meet her eye level rather than looming over her. "Drink this. It'll help with the shock." She took the glass with shaking hands, stared at it for a moment, then drank it in one swallow, coughing slightly at the burn. "I don't understand," she said finally, looking up at him with red-rimmed eyes. "Why would you buy photos like that? What kind of person does that?" Victor could have lied, could have offered some sanitized explanation. But something about her direct gaze, about the way she was clearly fighting to hold herself together, made him choose truth instead. "I'm not a good man, Miss Chun. I operate in spaces most people don't acknowledge exist. Sometimes that involves acquiring leverage, information, or assets that others might want. I don't apologize for what I am. But I have lines I don't cross, and exploiting medical trust is one of them. If I'd known what these photos really were, I would have destroyed them and gone after the source." She studied him, this dangerous man with his expensive suit and his cold eyes that somehow held a flicker of what might have been genuine anger on her behalf. "You're telling me you're some kind of criminal with standards," she said, and there was a thread of hysteria in her voice. "Essentially, yes." Victor stood up, putting distance between them again. "And right now, those standards mean I'm going to find out exactly how your doctor's operation works, who else is involved, and how many other women have been violated the same way." Natasha stood up too, unsteady but determined. "You need to give me those photos. All of them. I'll take them to the police. I'll file a report. Victor shook his head. "The police will take your statement, start an investigation that might take months or years, and in the meantime, your doctor will destroy evidence, hide behind lawyers, and continue his operation. I can have answers in hours. I can make this stop permanently." She stared at him, clearly torn between outrage and desperate hope. "You're talking about doing something illegal. I'm talking about doing something effective." Victor picked up his phone, checked a text from Dmitri. "I already have your doctor's home address, his office location, and the name of his associate who handles sales. I can have all copies of your photos secured by tomorrow evening." The police couldn't get a warrant that fast. Natasha wrapped her arms around herself, a protective gesture that made Victor's chest tighten with unexpected protectiveness. "And what do you want in return?" she asked quietly. "Men like you don't do favors out of kindness." Victor considered her question. Smart woman, not letting fear override her survival instincts. "I want you to let me fix this properly. Work with me instead of against me. Your cooperation will make the process faster and cleaner. In return, I'll eliminate the threat, protect you from any retaliation, and make sure your doctor never does this to anyone else." The silence stretched between them. Victor could see her processing, weighing impossible options. Finally, she lifted her chin, and he saw steel beneath the shock. "If I agree to this, I want every photo destroyed. Every copy, every file, everything. And I want to know what happens to him. I want to watch that bastard's world burn." Victor felt something shift in his perception of Natasha Chun. She wasn't just a victim. She was a survivor who'd already decided to fight back. "Done," he said simply. "But there's one condition. You're not safe at your apartment anymore. Your doctor knows you've had this exam, knows what he photographed. If he realizes you're aware of what he's done, you become a liability he might try to eliminate. You need protection until this is resolved. Natasha's eyes widened. You want me to go into hiding? I want you to stay at my penthouse where my security can keep you alive. Victor watched her carefully, saw the war between practicality and fear play across her face. I'm not asking you to trust me completely. I'm asking you to make the smart choice. She laughed, a broken sound that held no humor. The smart choice would have been never trusting Dr. Brennan in the first place. Clearly, my judgment is excellent. Your judgment was to trust a licensed physician with excellent reviews and professional credentials, Victor countered. That's not failure. That's him being a predator who knows how to appear trustworthy. Don't let him make you doubt yourself on top of everything else. Something in his words seemed to reach her. Natasha's expression shifted, some of the self-blame easing. She took a long breath, then nodded once. Okay, I'll work with you. But I have conditions too. No one else sees those photos. You keep me informed about everything you find. And if I say stop at any point, you stop. Victor extended his hand. Agreed. She hesitated only a moment before taking it. Her hand was small in his, still trembling slightly, but her grip was firm. As their hands clasped, Victor felt the weight of an unfamiliar responsibility settle over him. He'd made many deals in his life, most of them calculated and cold. But looking at Natasha Chen's devastated face, seeing the fragile trust she was placing in him despite every reason not to, he knew this was different. This wasn't just business. This was personal. And Viktor Volkov always kept his word when things became personal. Natasha had left Victor's presence in a daze, clutching a business card with his personal number and strict instructions to call him if anything felt wrong. She'd driven home on autopilot, her mind spinning with the impossibility of the last hour. By the time she reached her apartment building, the shock had begun wearing off, replaced by a creeping paranoia that made her check over her shoulder 3 times before entering the lobby. The next 2 days passed in a fog of horror and helplessness. Natasha had called the Illinois Medical Board first thing the next morning, her voice shaking as she tried to explain what had happened. The woman on the other end had been sympathetic, but ultimately discouraging. If you signed consent forms for photographic documentation, the woman had said carefully, then technically the photos were taken with your permission. You could file a complaint about improper use of those images, but proving distribution would require substantial evidence. Do you have proof he sold them? Natasha had stared at her phone after that call, feeling sick. She had proof, sort of. Viktor Volkov's word that he'd purchased them. But she couldn't exactly tell the medical board that a man who'd admitted to being a criminal had shown her the photos at what was clearly some kind of illegal business meeting. She tried calling Dr. Brennan's office next, thinking maybe confrontation would work. But when the receptionist had answered cheerfully, Natasha had frozen, suddenly terrified that alerting him directly might make things worse. She'd hung up without speaking. By the second night, Natasha was barely sleeping. Every sound in her apartment building made her jump. She kept thinking about Victor's warning that if Brennan realized she knew, she might become a liability. The photos were out there, somewhere, in the hands of God knew how many men. The violation felt like it was happening over and over again in her mind. She was sitting on her couch at 9 in the evening, staring blankly at her television without seeing it, when someone knocked on her door. Natasha's heart stopped. She hadn't buzzed anyone up. The knock came again, firm and authoritative. She crept to the door and peered through the peephole, then felt her breath catch. Viktor Volkov stood in her hallway, looking exactly as dangerous and out of place as he had in that wellness center suite. He was alone, at least, wearing dark jeans and a leather jacket instead of his suit, but somehow that made him look even more intimidating. Natasha opened the door with the chain still attached. What are you doing here? Victor's pale blue eyes assessed her quickly, and she saw his jaw tighten. You look like you haven't slept in days. Let me in. I have information. She shouldn't. She should tell him to leave, should call the police if she was really smart. Instead, Natasha unhooked the chain and stepped back. Victor entered her small apartment, and the space immediately felt smaller with his presence filling it. He glanced around, taking in her modest furniture and the deadbolt she'd clearly added recently. Good instincts, he said, nodding at the lock. But if someone really wanted to get to you, this wouldn't stop them. That's not comforting, Natasha said tightly. How did you even find my address? Victor gave her a look that suggested the question was naive. I found your address in the first 10 minutes after you left my office 2 days ago. What I've spent the last 48 hours doing is finding out everything about Richard Brennan's operation. He pulled out a tablet from inside his jacket and set it on her small dining table. Natasha moved closer despite her reservations, drawn by the promise of answers. Your doctor has been doing this for at least 3 years, Victor said, pulling up files on the screen. We've identified 47 women whose photos he's sold through various channels. Some through direct sales to collectors like the one I purchased from. Others through subscription websites that market medical fetish content. His associate, a man named Dennis Coughlin, handles the distribution and money laundering. Natasha felt bile rise in her throat. 47 women. The number made her dizzy. Did any of them know? Did anyone report him? 2 tried, Victor said quietly. One filed a complaint with the medical board 18 months ago. It was dismissed due to lack of evidence and her signed consent forms. The other went to the police, but Brennan's lawyers buried her in NDAs and threatened legal action for defamation. She eventually dropped it. Both women had their lives turned upside down for trying to get justice. The injustice of it made Natasha want to scream. So he just keeps doing it. Because he's got money and lawyers and knows how to cover himself. Victor's expression hardened. He keeps doing it because the system is designed to protect men like him. But I'm not part of that system, Miss Chun. I play by different rules. Natasha looked at him. This man who'd walked into her life through the worst possible circumstances, who represented danger but was the only person offering real solutions. What exactly are your rules, Mr. Volkov? Call me Victor. And my rules are simple. People who exploit the vulnerable deserve to have their power stripped away. Permanently. The weight in that last word sent a chill down Natasha's spine. She thought she should probably be afraid of what he was implying, but instead, she felt a savage satisfaction at the idea of Brennan facing real consequences. What do you want from me? She asked. You didn't come here just to share information. Victor straightened, and she could see him choosing his words carefully. I want your cooperation in taking down Brennan's entire operation. Not just stopping him, but exposing everyone involved and protecting all 47 women. To do that properly requires walking a line between legal action and the kind of pressure that makes people cooperate immediately. Natasha crossed her arms. You're talking about blackmail. Threats. Maybe worse. I'm talking about efficiency, Victor corrected. The legal route will take years if it works at all. Women will continue being victimized during that time. Brennan will have opportunities to destroy evidence or disappear. My way, we shut him down completely in a matter of days. And if I say no? If I decide to take my chances with the police? Victor's gaze didn't waver. Then I'll respect your decision and give you every piece of evidence I've gathered to support your case. But Miss Chun, Natasha, he amended when she frowned. You need to understand that going the legal route puts you in the crosshairs publicly. Your name will be associated with this case. People will Google you and potentially find the photos he took. Defense lawyers will dig into your life looking for anything to discredit you. And Brennan will know you're the one who came forward. Natasha felt cold settle into her bones. And your way keeps me anonymous? My way means Brennan has bigger problems than one victim speaking out. We create pressure from multiple angles. His buyers get nervous about exposure. His associate flips on him to save himself. The medical board receives evidence they can't ignore. And if needed, Brennan faces the kind of consequences that make him disappear from this city entirely. There was no mistaking the implication. Natasha walked to her window, looking out at the Chicago skyline. She'd moved here to start over, to escape a relationship where she'd felt powerless. Now she was being offered power, the kind that came with compromise and danger. You said I'm not safe here, she said without turning around. That he might try to eliminate me as a liability. Victor moved closer, though he stayed a respectful distance behind her. He knows you had an appointment. If he's keeping any kind of records, your name is associated with images that are now in circulation. The man I bought them from got spooked when I started asking questions and likely alerted his sources. Brennan has to assume someone's investigating. The smart move for him is identifying potential weak points. Natasha's reflection in the window showed a woman who looked haunted, fragile. She hated seeing herself that way. And you think I'm a weak point? I think you're a woman who walked away from that meeting alive and aware, which makes you the biggest threat he's currently facing. Victor's voice was matter-of-fact. Which is why you can't stay here alone. Natasha finally turned to face him. You want me to come stay at your penthouse? With you? A man I've known for 2 days who just admitted he's a criminal. Victor's mouth quirked in something that wasn't quite a smile. I understand the irony. But consider your alternatives. You can stay here and hope Brennan doesn't send someone to silence you. You can check into a hotel under your own name, which he could find easily. Or you can accept protection from someone who has the resources and motivation to keep you alive while we dismantle his operation. Why do you even care? Natasha asked suddenly. You bought those photos. You were going to use them for leverage or whatever. Why does it matter to you what happens to me or those other women? Something shifted in Victor's expression, a crack in his controlled facade. When I was 12, my mother was assaulted by a man with power and connections. She tried to report it, but he had lawyers and money and friends in the police department. Nothing happened to him. Victor paused, his accent thickening slightly. She was never the same. So when I see men who use their position to exploit vulnerable people, when I see systems that protect predators instead of victims, it matters to me. Perhaps more than it should. The raw honesty in his words cut through Natasha's defenses. She saw the boy he'd been, helpless to protect his mother. She saw the man he'd become, building power specifically to prevent that helplessness from happening again. I have conditions, she said quietly. If I agree to this, name them. I want to know everything you find. No keeping me in the dark to protect me, or whatever. This is my violation, and I deserve to know the full scope of it. Victor nodded. Agreed. No one else sees those photos. I don't care if they're evidence or leverage or whatever. They don't get used or distributed further. Already destroyed, Victor said. I had them wiped from my files last night. The physical copies are in a secure location that only I can access, and they'll be eliminated once we're certain there are no other copies in circulation. Natasha felt something ease in her chest. And I want protection for the other women too. When this comes out, they need to be shielded from exposure as much as possible. That's already part of the plan, Victor assured her. Anonymous complaints filed with multiple agencies, each one citing different evidence, so the sources can't be traced back to individuals. We'll force systematic investigation while keeping the victims protected. She studied him, looking for deception or hidden motives, but his gaze was steady and sincere. Fine, I'll come stay at your penthouse, but I'm keeping my phone on me at all times, and if you try anything inappropriate, I will find a way to make you regret it. Victor's expression finally softened into something approaching respect. I would expect nothing less, Miss Chun. My housekeeper, Rosa, will be there as well. She's the closest thing I have to family, and she'll ensure everything remains proper. You'll have your own suite with locks on the doors. This is about your safety, nothing more. Natasha wanted to believe him. More than that, she needed to believe that someone was on her side in this nightmare. When do we leave? She asked. Now, Victor said. Pack whatever you need for a week. We move quickly, before anyone tracks our connection. 10 minutes later, Natasha was in the passenger seat of Victor's Mercedes, a bag of hastily packed clothes in the back, watching her apartment building recede in the side mirror. Her phone buzzed with a text from Miranda asking if she was okay, if she'd been sick the last 2 days. Natasha had called in to work claiming a family emergency. She typed back a quick reassurance, hating the lie, but knowing the truth was impossible to explain. Victor drove with the same controlled competence he seemed to bring to everything, navigating the evening traffic toward the downtown high-rises that represented a world so far removed from her own it might as well be another planet. Tell me about your penthouse, Natasha said, needing to fill the silence before her anxiety overwhelmed her. 23rd floor of the residences at 2 Lincoln, Victor replied. 3 bedrooms, security system connected directly to my team's monitoring center, and Rosa makes breakfast every morning at 7 if you're awake. She'll like you. How do you know? Because Rosa has excellent instincts about people, and you're brave enough to trust a dangerous man to protect you from an even more dangerous situation. That kind of courage impresses her. Natasha looked at him. This contradiction of a person who spoke about criminal operations in the same breath as his housekeeper's breakfast schedule. I'm not brave. I'm terrified. Bravery isn't the absence of fear, Victor said quietly. It's acting despite it. You're doing that right now. The Mercedes pulled into an underground parking garage beneath a gleaming tower of glass and steel. Victor used a key card to access a private section, parking in a spot marked with his name. He grabbed Natasha's bag before she could protest and led her to a private elevator that required another key card for access. The ride up was silent except for the subtle hum of machinery. Natasha watched the numbers climb, feeling like she was ascending into some alternate reality where mob bosses protected physical therapists and medical professionals were the real monsters. The elevator opened directly into Victor's penthouse, and despite her anxiety, Natasha couldn't suppress a small gasp. The space was stunning, all floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Chicago's skyline, modern furniture that managed to look comfortable rather than sterile, and artwork that was probably worth more than she'd make in several years. A woman emerged from what appeared to be the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. She was small and elegant, probably in her late 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and warm brown eyes that immediately found Natasha with interest. "Rosa, this is Natasha Chun," Victor said, his tone shifting to something gentler. "She'll be staying with us for a while." "Natasha, this is Rosa Moretti. She keeps my life organized and makes sure I eat actual food instead of working through meals." Rosa smiled and extended her hand. "Welcome, dear. Victor called me earlier to prepare the guest suite. I hope you'll be comfortable." Natasha shook her hand, feeling some of her tension ease at the genuine warmth in the older woman's manner. "Thank you. I'm sorry to impose." "Nonsense," Rosa said firmly. "This place is too big for just Victor and me rattling around. It'll be nice to have another woman here. Now, you look exhausted. Have you eaten?" Natasha realized she couldn't remember her last meal. "Not really," she admitted. Rosa made a disapproving sound and immediately turned toward the kitchen. "I'll make you something. You go get settled, and then you eat." "Victor, show her the guest suite and stop looming." Victor's expression flickered with amusement. "Yes, Rosa." He led Natasha down a hallway, past what appeared to be his office and a formal living area, to a door at the end. "Your suite," he said, opening it. The space inside was larger than her entire apartment. A king-size bed dominated the room, with its own sitting area, a massive closet, and an en-suite bathroom visible through another doorway. The windows here also offered stunning views, and everything was decorated in soft neutrals that felt calming despite the luxury. "The locks work from the inside," Victor said, demonstrating the deadbolt and chain on the door. "No one has keys except you. My room is at the other end of the penthouse. Rosa's suite is on the second bedroom level, between us. If you need anything, there's an intercom system, or you can call either of our cells." Natasha set her purse down on the bed, feeling overwhelmed by the surreal nature of her situation. "This is really happening," she said quietly. "I'm really staying in a mobster's penthouse because my doctor is a predator." Victor moved to leave, but paused at the door. "For what it's worth, you're safe here. Safer than you've been since walking into that examination room 3 months ago. We're going to fix this, Natasha. I promise you that." After he left, closing the door quietly behind him, Natasha sat on the edge of the impossibly comfortable bed and let herself feel the full weight of the last 2 days. She'd lost her sense of safety, discovered a violation she'd never consented to, and placed her trust in a man who operated outside every law she'd been raised to respect. But Viktor Volkov had also been the only person who'd looked at her situation and offered real solutions, who'd promised protection and justice when the legitimate authorities had offered neither. Natasha caught her reflection in the mirror across the room. She looked small and lost in this enormous space. But underneath the fear and shock, she could feel something else building. Anger. Determination. The same steel that had finally given her the courage to leave her ex-boyfriend. Victor had said she was brave. Maybe he was right. And maybe together, they would make Richard Brennan pay for what he'd done. The first morning, Natasha woke disoriented in the unfamiliar luxury of Victor's guest suite. Sunlight streamed through windows she'd forgotten to curtain, and for a blissful moment, she didn't remember why she was there. Then reality crashed back, and she had to fight the urge to pull the covers over her head and hide from the world. Instead, she forced herself up, showered in the ridiculous spa bathroom with its rainfall showerhead and heated floors, and ventured out to face whatever this new arrangement would be. She found Victor in the kitchen, which was even more spectacular than she'd realized last night. Professional-grade appliances gleamed under perfect lighting, and Victor stood at the stove in fitted black pants and a gray Henley, his hair still slightly damp from his own shower. He was cooking something that smelled amazing, moving around the space with the kind of comfortable competence that suggested this wasn't a rare occurrence. He glanced up when she entered, and Natasha felt suddenly self-conscious in her yoga pants and oversized sweatshirt, her wet hair pulled back in a messy bun. "Good morning," Victor said. "Coffee, please," Natasha managed, watching as he poured her a cup from a French press without asking how she took it. When he handed it to her, she discovered he'd somehow known she preferred it black. "Did Rosa tell you? You had a coffee cup in your apartment sink when I came by," Victor said simply. "Black coffee, no residue suggesting cream or sugar." "I noticed details." That should have been creepy, Natasha thought. Instead, it felt oddly considerate that he'd paid attention. She sipped the coffee, which was excellent, and tried not to stare at the way his shoulders moved as he returned to the stove. "I'm making shakshuka," he said. "Rosa's morning off. I hope you're not vegetarian." "I'm not. But you don't have to cook for me. I can fend for myself." Victor plated 2 portions of the egg and tomato dish, the presentation restaurant quality. "Consider it part of the protection package. Can't have you wasting away on my watch." They ate at the kitchen island, and Natasha was surprised by how comfortable the silence felt. She'd expected awkwardness, tension maybe, but Victor seemed content to let her process at her own pace. The food was delicious, spiced perfectly, and she found herself eating more than she had in days. Rosa came back from her errands around noon, immediately bustling around the penthouse and treating Natasha like an honored guest rather than an imposition. She brought fresh flowers for Natasha's suite, asked about her dietary preferences, and generally radiated the kind of maternal warmth that made Natasha's chest ache with unexpected homesickness. By evening, Victor had set up a workspace in his office where they could review his team's findings together. Natasha sat beside him at the large desk, watching as he pulled up files on his computer, acutely aware of how close they were sitting. She could smell his cologne, something subtle and expensive, could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Focus," she told herself firmly. "These are the women we've identified so far," Victor said, displaying a spreadsheet with names, dates, and types of documentation. "Your medical background might help us understand his pattern. See anything that stands out?" Natasha leaned closer to study the screen, trying to ignore how her shoulder brushed Victor's in the process. All the appointments were coded as comprehensive physicals or annual exams, she noted. And the age range is specific, 24 to 35. He's targeting women who are young enough to be vulnerable, but old enough to be taken seriously as patients. Victor made a note. What else? She scrolled through more entries, her professional, eye-catching details. Most of these women are listed as having no regular physician before him. They're new to the city or changing doctors for the first move. That's deliberate. They don't have established medical relationships to compare against, so when he says his photographic protocol is standard, they have no reference to question it. "That's useful," Victor said quietly. "We can use that pattern to identify other potential victims and reach out to warn them." They worked late into the evening, Victor ordering dinner from a nearby restaurant, when Natasha's stomach growled audibly. He was careful never to crowd her space, she noticed. When he needed to reach across the desk, he announced it first. When he had to leave the room for a phone call, he told her where he'd be. It was the kind of hyper-vigilant consideration that shouldn't have been necessary, but made her feel safer than she'd expected. On the third night, they were reviewing financial records that Dmitri had somehow acquired when Natasha's hand cramped from taking notes. She flexed her fingers, wincing. "Take a break," Victor said immediately. "You've been working for 4 hours straight." "So have you," Natasha pointed out. "I'm used to it." Victor stood and moved to a small bar in the corner. "You're not. Wine?" Natasha hesitated, then nodded. Something in Victor's manner made her feel like she could refuse without offense, which paradoxically made her more willing to accept. He poured 2 glasses of red wine, handed her one, then surprised her by settling on the couch across from the desk rather than returning to his chair beside her. The distance felt deliberate, giving her space. "Tell me something," Victor said after a moment. "Something that has nothing to do with Brennan or this situation. Who is Natasha Chun when her life isn't being turned upside down?" The question caught her off guard. "I'm a physical therapist," she started. "I know your job. I want to know you." Natasha sipped her wine, considering. I like helping people heal, she said finally. There's something satisfying about watching someone regain mobility they thought they'd lost. And I like Chicago. The architecture, the lake, the way the city feels alive even in winter. I moved here 6 months ago from Seattle for a fresh start. Running from something? Victor's voice held no judgment, just curiosity. Someone, Natasha corrected quietly. She hadn't planned to talk about this, but the wine and the late hour and Victor's patient silence loosened something in her. My ex-boyfriend. We were together for 2 years, and she paused, searching for words. He was good at making me feel like I was the problem. Like my instincts were wrong, my reactions were overblown, my needs were unreasonable. By the end, I couldn't trust my own judgment anymore. Victor's expression darkened. Did he hurt you physically? No, just emotionally. Which sounds less serious when I say it out loud, but it didn't feel less serious while it was happening. Emotional abuse is still abuse, Victor said firmly. The fact that he didn't hit you doesn't minimize what he took from you. Natasha felt something ease in her chest, a validation she hadn't realized she needed. That's why this thing with Brennan feels so. She struggled for words. I just started trusting myself again. Started believing my instincts weren't broken. And then I trusted a doctor who violated that trust in the worst possible way, and now I'm questioning everything again. Victor set down his wine glass and leaned forward, his pale eyes intent. Listen to me carefully, Natasha. What Brennan did had nothing to do with your judgment. He's a predator who built a professional facade specifically to exploit trusting patients. Trusting a licensed physician with excellent credentials isn't failure. That's exactly what you're supposed to do. He betrayed that trust, not because you were naive, but because he's a criminal who understands how to abuse his position. The conviction in his voice made Natasha's throat tight. How do you know so much about this? She asked quietly. Victor was silent for a long moment, and Natasha thought he might not answer. Then he spoke, his accent thickening slightly the way it did when he was emotional. When I was 12, my mother was assaulted by one of my father's business associates. A man with power and money and connections. She tried to report it, but he had lawyers and friends in the police department. My father, Victor's jaw clenched. My father cared more about the business relationship than protecting my mother. He convinced her to stay quiet to avoid scandal. Natasha's heart broke for the boy he'd been. I'm so sorry. She was never the same after that, Victor continued. Lost her confidence, her sense of safety. She died when I was 17, and I've always believed that what happened broke something fundamental in her. So when I see men who use their positions to exploit vulnerable people, when I see systems that protect predators, it's personal for me. I built my organization specifically to have the kind of power those systems can't touch. That's why you operate outside the law, Natasha said, understanding clicking into place. Because the law failed your mother. The law fails a lot of people, Victor said quietly. I decided early on that I'd rather be feared and effective than legitimate and useless. They sat in silence, the weight of shared trauma creating a connection that felt deeper than the few days they'd known each other. Natasha found herself wanting to close the distance between them, to offer comfort, but she wasn't sure if that was wise or just another example of her questionable judgment. Victor must have read something in her expression because he stood abruptly. It's late. You should get some rest. Natasha nodded, disappointment flickering through her that she didn't want to examine too closely. She headed toward the door, then paused. Victor? Yes. Thank you for telling me that, and for not making me feel stupid about trusting Brennan. Something softened in his severe features. You're not stupid, Natasha. You're one of the smartest, strongest people I've met. Don't let anyone, including yourself, convince you otherwise. That night, lying in her luxurious bed, Natasha couldn't stop thinking about Victor. The contrast between his dangerous reputation and his gentle consideration. The way he'd shared his painful history to make her feel less alone. The way her body had responded to his proximity during their work sessions, hyper-aware of every accidental brush of skin. She shouldn't be attracted to him. He was a criminal who'd purchased her intimate photos, even if he hadn't known what they were. He represented everything she should be running from. But he also made her feel safe in a way she couldn't remember feeling with anyone else. And the way he looked at her, like she was brave rather than broken, made her want to be that person. On the 5th day, they were working at the desk again when an alarm sounded through the penthouse. Victor's entire demeanor shifted instantly from relaxed to dangerously alert. "Stay here," he ordered, already moving toward the door. "What's happening?" Natasha demanded, fear spiking through her. "Someone's trying to bypass the building's security system," Victor said, pulling out his phone. "They're specifically targeting this floor." Before Natasha could process that, Victor was making calls in rapid Russian. Within seconds, Dmitri's voice came through a speaker system, confirming additional security was en route. Victor moved to a panel by the door and pulled out a handgun, checking it with practiced efficiency that should have terrified Natasha, but instead made her feel perversely safer. "Come with me," he said, holding out his hand. "Away from the windows." Natasha took his hand without hesitation, letting him pull her into the interior hallway. He positioned himself between her and the main entrance, one hand still holding hers, the other holding the gun with casual competence. "Is it Brennan?" she whispered. "Likely someone he sent," Victor replied. "Dmitri's people are already in the stairwell. They won't make it to this floor, but I'm not taking chances with your safety." They stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Natasha was acutely aware of Victor's thumb stroking small circles on the back of her hand, a soothing gesture he probably didn't even realize he was doing. His body was tense and ready, but his touch was gentle. The alarm stopped. Victor's phone buzzed with a text, and Natasha felt him relax incrementally. "Neutralized," he said. "2 men, both now in custody of my security team. We'll find out who sent them and why." Natasha released a breath she'd been holding. "Thank you for protecting me." Victor turned to face her, and in the dim hallway lighting, his eyes looked almost silver. "This is what I do, Natasha. I protect what's mine." The possessiveness in those words should have bothered her. Instead, Natasha felt heat pool in her stomach at the intensity of his gaze. Later that evening, after Dmitri had come and gone with reports that the men were indeed hired by someone connected to Brennan's operation, Natasha found herself unable to shake the feeling of Victor's hand in hers, the way he'd positioned himself as a shield without hesitation. She was in dangerous territory, she realized. Not just physically, but emotionally. She was falling for a man who solved problems with violence, who operated completely outside the moral boundaries she'd always accepted. But Viktor Volkov had also shown her more genuine care and respect in 5 days than her ex had managed in 2 years. He'd validated her trauma, protected her safety, and never once made her feel weak for needing help. As she lay in bed that night, Natasha admitted to herself what she'd been trying to deny. She was attracted to Victor. More than attracted. She was starting to care about him in ways that felt terrifying and inevitable. And judging by the way he'd looked at her in that hallway, by the protective possessiveness in his voice, Victor might be feeling the same way. The thought should have scared her. Instead, it made her feel more alive than she had in months. By the 6th day living in Victor's penthouse, Natasha had fallen into a rhythm that felt dangerously close to comfortable. Morning coffee with Victor while Rosa bustled around preparing breakfast. Days spent working through evidence files and making contact with other victims through carefully anonymous channels. Evenings reviewing their progress and planning next moves. It was domestic in a way that made her forget sometimes that she was there because a predator had violated her trust and another predator was protecting her from the consequences. She was reading through victim testimonies that afternoon, her heart breaking with each familiar story, when Victor appeared in the doorway of his office where she'd been working. "Take a break," he said without preamble. "You've been reading trauma accounts for 3 hours, and you look like you need air." Natasha glanced up, surprised to find her eyes burning with unshed tears. "I'm fine." "You're not. And that's okay," Victor said quietly. "But you need to step away from this for a few hours. Let me take you to dinner." She blinked. "Like, out to dinner? In public? Like to dinner where you can think about something other than Brennan for an evening?" Victor's expression was carefully neutral, but she could see the concern beneath it. "You need a break, Natasha. This work is important, but burning yourself out won't help anyone." Part of her wanted to refuse, to insist she was fine and could keep working. But the larger part recognized the exhaustion settling into her bones, the way each victim's story was adding weight to her chest. "Okay," she agreed, "but nowhere too fancy. I didn't exactly pack formal wear." Victor's mouth quirked in something approaching a smile. "I know a place. Casual, but good food. Be ready in 30 minutes." An hour later, Natasha found herself on a private rooftop restaurant she'd never known existed, with a view of the city that made her breath catch. The space was small and intimate, only a handful of tables, with string lights creating a warm glow against the evening sky. "How did you even find this place?" she asked as Victor held out her chair. "I own the building," Victor said simply, settling across from her. "The restaurant is technically closed tonight, but the chef owed me a favor." Of course he did. Natasha should have been overwhelmed by the casual display of wealth and influence, but instead, she found herself charmed by Victor's matter-of-fact approach to it. He didn't flaunt his resources. He simply used them when necessary. The food that arrived was extraordinary without being pretentious. Simple pasta dishes with fresh ingredients, a salad that tasted like it had been picked that morning, bread still warm from the oven. They ate slowly, and for the first time since this nightmare began, Natasha felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. "Tell me something," Victor said after their plates were cleared and wine had been poured. "What did you want to be when you were a child?" The question surprised her. "A dancer, actually. I took ballet from age 5 to 16. Got pretty serious about it. Was considering professional training." "What stopped you?" "Reality. Mostly," Natasha said with a rueful smile. "I was good, but not exceptional. And I discovered I liked helping people more than performing. Physical therapy let me combine my understanding of bodies and movement with actually making a difference in people's lives." Victor listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed he was paying attention not just to her words, but to the passion beneath them. She found herself telling him about her favorite patients, about the satisfaction of watching someone walk without pain for the first time in years, about her dreams of eventually opening her own practice that focused on underserved communities. "You light up when you talk about it," Victor observed. "The work means something to you beyond just a paycheck." "It's purpose," Natasha said. "After my ex spent 2 years convincing me I wasn't good enough at anything, finding work that I knew I was good at, that genuinely helped people, it was like reclaiming part of myself." Victor's expression shifted, something intense flickering in his pale eyes. "You are extraordinary at what you do. I've watched you analyze medical records and identify patterns that my team missed. You see connections and understand vulnerabilities in ways that only someone with both clinical knowledge and deep empathy could." Natasha felt warmth spread through her chest at the compliment. "What about you?" she asked, deflecting from the emotion. "What did young Victor want to be?" "An architect," Victor said, surprising her. "I loved buildings, the way they're designed, how form and function intersect. I used to sketch floor plans obsessively." "Why didn't you pursue it?" He was quiet for a moment, staring out at the city skyline. "Because after my mother died, I was angry. Architecture requires patience and vision and belief in building something that will last. I wanted immediate power, immediate ability to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. So I went into my father's organization instead, learned how to operate in the spaces where the law doesn't reach." "But you regret it," Natasha said softly. "Not entirely. I've helped people who the system failed. I've stopped threats that police couldn't touch. But," Victor paused, choosing his words carefully, "I've also compromised myself in ways that make it hard to look in the mirror some mornings. The violence, the moral gray areas, they take a toll." Natasha reached across the table impulsively, covering his hand with hers. "You're helping me. You're helping 47 women who had nowhere else to turn. That matters, Victor." He turned his hand over, lacing their fingers together, and Natasha felt electricity shoot up her arm at the contact. "It matters more because it's you," he said quietly. "These past 6 days, working with you, seeing your strength and your compassion, it's made me want to be better, to be someone you could respect." The confession hung between them, vulnerable and honest. Natasha's heart was pounding, and she knew they were crossing a line they couldn't uncross. "I need to tell you something," Victor continued, his grip on her hand tightening slightly. "I'm leaving the organization. I've been transitioning out for months, moving all my operations legitimate. This case with Brennan made me realize I don't want to be the man who operates in shadows anymore. I want to build something clean, something I can be proud of." "Why?" Natasha asked, though she suspected she knew. "Because of you," Victor said simply. "Because you look at me like I could be someone good, and I want to deserve that. Even if," he paused, his expression guarded, "even if nothing happens between us, you've already changed me, Natasha." You've reminded me that there's more than just power and protection. There's purpose. Tears pricked Natasha's eyes, overwhelmed by the weight of his words. Victor, I don't know if I can do this. I'm terrified of trusting anyone after everything that's happened. You represent danger and safety at the same time, and I don't know how to reconcile that. I know, Victor said gently, and I'm not asking you to figure it out tonight. I just need you to know that I see you, all of you, and you're worth waiting for, however long it takes. They sat there for a long moment, hands clasped across the table, the city lights spreading out below them like scattered diamonds. Natasha felt herself teetering on the edge of something huge and terrifying and necessary. Can we go back? She asked quietly. I think I need to process this somewhere private. The drive back to the penthouse was charged with unspoken tension. Victor's hand rested on the gear shift, so close to her knee she could feel the heat of it. Every time he shifted, his knuckles would brush her leg, and Natasha had to concentrate on breathing normally. Rosa had already gone to her suite for the night when they arrived. The penthouse felt enormous and intimate at once, just the two of them in all that space. Natasha headed toward her guest suite, then stopped in the hallway. Victor had followed at a respectful distance, clearly intending to give her space, but something in her rebelled against the separation. The past few days crashed over her suddenly. The violation, the fear, the exhaustion of holding herself together. And underneath it all, the growing certainty that Viktor Volkov was the safest she'd felt in years, even though logic said he should be the most dangerous. Victor, she started, then her composure cracked. I can't stop thinking about those photos. About all those women. About how Brennan he just took something without asking. And we trusted him because we were supposed to trust him. And how is anyone supposed to trust anyone when even doctors can be monsters? The tears came then, hot and overwhelming. And before she could stop herself, Natasha was sobbing. She felt Victor's arms come around her immediately, gathering her against his chest with surprising gentleness for someone so large and dangerous. I've got you, he murmured, one hand cradling the back of her head while the other wrapped securely around her waist. You're safe, Natasha. I promise you're safe. She cried into his shirt, months of stress and violation and fear pouring out in ragged sobs. Victor just held her, steady and solid, letting her break down without trying to fix it or minimize it. His hand stroked her hair in soothing motions, and she could feel his heartbeat under her cheek, strong and even. Eventually, the storm passed, leaving her exhausted and raw. Natasha pulled back enough to look up at Victor, suddenly aware of how close they were, how his arms were still around her. I'm sorry, she whispered. I got your shirt all wet. I don't care about the shirt, Victor said, his voice rough. He reached up to wipe a tear from her cheek with his thumb, the gesture achingly tender. You're allowed to fall apart sometimes, Natasha. You don't have to be strong every moment. You make me feel like I can be, she said quietly. Like even when I'm falling apart, I'm still okay. Victor's eyes darkened, his gaze dropping to her lips for just a moment before returning to her eyes. You're more than okay. You're incredible. Natasha's breath caught. She saw the want in his expression, but also the restraint, the way he was holding himself back and waiting for her to decide. This man who could be so dangerous had given her all the power in this moment. She made her choice. Rising up on her toes, Natasha pressed her lips to his, tentative but certain. Victor went completely still for a heartbeat, and she felt a flutter of panic that maybe she'd misread everything. Then his hand came up to cup her face, and he was kissing her back with a gentleness that made her chest ache. Are you sure? He whispered against her mouth, pulling back just enough to search her eyes. Yes, Natasha breathed. I'm sure. Victor kissed her again, deeper this time, but still controlled, still checking her response with every movement. His other hand settled on her waist, thumb stroking small circles through her shirt. When Natasha opened her mouth under his, Victor made a sound low in his throat that sent heat pooling through her entire body. She pressed closer, her hands sliding up his chest to his shoulders, and Victor's arms tightened around her in response. The kiss turned hungry, desperate, months of tension and days of building attraction finally finding outlet. Victor's fingers threaded through her hair, tilting her head to deepen the kiss, and Natasha felt her knees go weak. He must have felt it too because he walked her backward until she was against the wall, his body caging hers in a way that felt protective rather than threatening. Natasha's hands found their way under his shirt, splaying across the warm skin of his back, feeling the flex of muscles as he held her. "Natasha," Victor said against her lips, his breathing ragged. "We should stop. You're vulnerable right now, and I don't want you to regret this." "I won't," she insisted, but even as she said it, exhaustion was pulling at her. The emotional breakdown had left her wrung out. Victor pulled back, his expression pained but resolute. "Sleep on it. If you still want this tomorrow, I'm not going anywhere." Before Natasha could argue, Victor's phone buzzed insistently in his pocket. He closed his eyes in clear frustration, then pulled it out to check the screen. His entire demeanor changed instantly, all business. "What is it?" Natasha asked. "Dmitri," Victor said shortly, already answering the call. He spoke in rapid Russian for a minute, his expression growing darker, then switched to English. "Say that again." Natasha watched as Victor's jaw clenched, the hand not holding the phone curling into a fist. "How long?" Victor demanded. 72 hours? "You're certain?" He listened for another moment, then ended the call and turned to Natasha with barely controlled fury. "Brennan is planning to flee the country," Victor said. Dimitri's contact in Homeland Security flagged a private charter flight booked for 3 days from now, destination Rio de Janeiro. He's taking backup copies of all his files with him, planning to continue his operation from Brazil where extradition is nearly impossible. Natasha felt ice flood her veins. "He's going to get away." "Not if I can help it," Victor said grimly. "But we have 72 hours to trap him legally and ensure he can never hurt anyone again. After that window closes, he disappears forever." The moment between them shattered, replaced by urgent necessity. Natasha's mind was already racing ahead, thinking through strategies and evidence. "What do we need to do?" she asked. Victor looked at her, and despite the crisis, heat still flickered in his gaze. "We finish what we started with Brennan." And then, his voice dropped lower, "We finish what we started here." The promise in his words made Natasha's pulse race. But first, they had a predator to stop, and only 3 days to do it. The next morning arrived with the weight of their deadline pressing down. Natasha woke early, her mind immediately jumping to the kiss in the hallway, to Victor's promise that they'd finish what they started after Brennan was handled. She could still feel the imprint of his hands on her waist, the gentleness of his touch despite his obvious desire. She found him already in the kitchen, looking like he hadn't slept much either. Their eyes met across the space, and the air between them felt charged with awareness and unfinished business. "Coffee," Victor offered, his voice slightly rougher than usual. "Please," Natasha said, moving closer. When he handed her the cup, their fingers brushed, and she saw his jaw tighten at the contact. "About last night," she started. "We have 72 hours to stop Brennan," Victor interrupted gently. "Everything else can wait until that's handled. You need to stay focused." He was right, but Natasha couldn't help feeling disappointed. Still, she nodded and forced herself to shift into work mode. "We need that server from his office. If he's planning to take backup copies, that's where they'll be." Victor pulled out his phone, already texting Dmitri. "Tonight. His office building has minimal security after 8. My team will handle the physical breach. You'll stay here where it's safe." Natasha set down her coffee cup firmly. "No, I'm coming with you. I know what to look for in his files. Medical terminology, patient coding systems. Your team might miss something crucial." Victor's expression turned stony. "Absolutely not. If something goes wrong, if Brennan has security we don't know about, I'm not risking you. And I'm not sitting here helpless while you do this without me," Natasha countered. "Victor, those are my photos in his files. My violation. I deserve to be part of taking him down." They stared at each other, wills clashing. Finally, Victor's shoulders dropped slightly in resignation. "You stay behind me at all times. You do exactly what I say without question. And if I tell you to run, you run. Understood?" "Understood," Natasha agreed. That evening, Natasha found herself in the back of a black SUV with Victor and Dmitri, wearing dark clothes Victor had somehow procured in her size. Her heart was pounding with adrenaline and fear, but also with a strange sense of rightness. This was her fight too. Dmitri was surprisingly friendly despite his intimidating appearance, treating her with the same respect she'd noticed from all of Victor's people. "The boss says you're smart," he said in accented English. "Good. We use brains more than muscle when possible." The office building was exactly as Victor had predicted. Minimal night security, easily bypassed by Dimitri's technical skills. They moved through darkened hallways with practiced silence, and Natasha tried not to think about how many times Victor had done something like this before. Dr. Brennan's suite was on the 7th floor. Dimitri picked the lock in seconds, and they were inside the space where Natasha had sat 3 months ago, trusting and vulnerable. The memory made her skin crawl. Victor must have seen something in her expression because his hand found hers briefly, squeezing once before releasing. "You're not that person anymore," he said quietly. "You're the one taking her power back." The words steadied her. Natasha moved to Brennan's computer system while Dimitri worked on locating the physical server. She pulled out the USB drive Victor had given her, loaded with software that would copy everything while leaving no trace of the intrusion. It took 20 minutes of tense silence, Natasha's fingers flying over the keyboard while Victor stood guard by the door. Finally, the download completed. "Got it," she whispered. "Patient files, transaction records, buyer lists, everything." Dimitri emerged from the back office. "Server copied. Also found these." He held up several external hard drives. "Backup copies. All labeled by year." Victor's smile was sharp and dangerous. "Perfect. Now he has nothing, and we have everything." They were almost to the exit when footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. Victor immediately pushed Natasha behind him, one hand moving to the gun concealed at his back. But the footsteps passed by, just a security guard on rounds, oblivious to their presence. The drive back to the penthouse felt surreal. Natasha kept thinking about the data on that USB drive, all the evidence they needed to destroy Brennan completely. They'd actually done it. Back at Victor's penthouse, adrenaline was still coursing through her veins. Dimitri left quickly to begin analyzing the files, leaving Victor and Natasha alone in the living room with the lights of Chicago spread out before them. "We did it," Natasha said, and suddenly she was laughing, a slightly hysterical sound born of relief and residual fear. "We actually broke into his office and stole everything." "You did well," Victor said, watching her with those intense pale eyes. "You were calm under pressure. Focused. Brave." Natasha crossed the space between them, still riding the high of success and survival. "I couldn't have done it without you. Without any of this. A week ago, I was paralyzed by fear and violation. Now I'm breaking into offices and stealing evidence. You did that. You made me feel powerful again." Victor's hands came up to frame her face, his touch gentle despite the barely leashed intensity she could see in his expression. "You were always powerful, Natasha. I just reminded you." She kissed him then, decisive and hungry, channeling all her adrenaline and emotion into the contact. Victor responded immediately, his arms wrapping around her and pulling her close. This kiss was different from the tentative exploration of last night. This was need and desire and the rush of having survived danger together. Natasha's hand slid under his jacket, pushing it off his shoulders. Victor broke the kiss long enough to shrug it off. Then his mouth was back on hers, more demanding now. His hands roamed her back, her waist, pulling her tighter against him until she could feel every hard plane of his body. "Are you sure?" Victor asked against her lips, even as his hands were making her shiver with want. "Because once we do this, Natasha, I'm not letting you go. I don't want you to let me go," she breathed. "I want this. I want you." Victor swept her up without warning, carrying her toward his bedroom at the far end of the penthouse. Natasha wrapped her arms around his neck, feeling safe and desired in ways she'd never experienced before. His bedroom was as luxurious as the rest of the penthouse, all dark wood and soft lighting. But Natasha barely registered the details. Victor set her down beside his bed, then paused, his hands settling on her waist. "Last chance," he said quietly. "We can stop right now, and nothing changes between us." Natasha answered by pulling her shirt over her head, watching Victor's eyes darken as he took in the sight of her. His hands came up slowly, reverently, skimming her sides before settling on her waist again. "You're beautiful," he said, and the raw honesty in his voice made her chest tight. They undressed each other slowly, taking time to explore and discover. Victor's body was mapped with scars, evidence of a dangerous life, but Natasha traced each one with gentle fingers. He shuddered under her touch, his breath coming faster. When they finally came together, It was with a tenderness that made Natasha's eyes burn. Victor moved slowly, watching her face, checking her reactions. "Are you okay?" he kept asking. "Does this feel good? Tell me what you need." It was so different from her past experiences, where she'd felt like an object being used rather than a person being cherished. Victor made her feel precious, powerful, like her pleasure mattered as much as his own. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Natasha's head on Victor's chest while his fingers traced lazy patterns on her shoulder. She felt languid and satisfied in a way she'd never experienced, her body humming with contentment. "I'm falling for you," Victor said quietly into the darkness. "I know it's fast. I know the circumstances are insane, but I need you to know that. This isn't just physical for me, Natasha. You've become essential." Natasha pressed a kiss to his chest, over his heart. "I'm falling for you too. And that terrifies me, but I'm done letting fear control my life. You make me brave, Victor." His arms tightened around her. "I'll never hurt you," he promised. "Never betray your trust. I swear it on my mother's memory." The weight of that oath settled over them like a blessing. They lay there in comfortable silence until Natasha finally dozed off, feeling safer than she had in months. She woke to Victor's phone buzzing insistently on the nightstand. He answered it quickly, his voice sleep-rough, but immediately tensed. Natasha sat up, pulling the sheet around herself as she watched his expression turn thunderous. "When?" Victor demanded. "Show me." He pulled up something on his phone, and Natasha saw his jaw clench with barely controlled rage. He was speaking rapidly in Russian now, his tone deadly, before finally ending the call and turning to her. "What's wrong?" Natasha asked, fear creeping back in. "Brennan knows," Victor said, his voice hard and cold in a way she'd never heard directed toward her. "He called your sister in Seattle an hour ago. Told her that unless you back off immediately, he'll release all your photos publicly and make sure she has an accident." The blood drained from Natasha's face. "Lily." "Oh God," he threatened. "Lily?" Victor was already out of bed, pulling on clothes with swift efficiency. "I have people en route to her location right now. She'll have protection within the hour." "But Natasha," he turned to face her, and she could see the dangerous man beneath the gentle lover. "Brennan just made his last mistake. Threatening your family means he's desperate, and desperate men make fatal errors." Natasha scrambled out of bed, grabbing her own clothes. "We need to stop him now, before he can hurt anyone else." Before, she stopped, feeling panic claw at her throat. What if he does release the photos? What if everyone sees them? Victor crossed to her in 2 strides, gripping her shoulders firmly. "Listen to me. We have evidence of his crimes on that USB drive. Financial records showing transactions, buyer lists proving distribution. If he releases your photos now, he's admitting to the crime. It would destroy any chance he has of claiming innocence. He's bluffing, Natasha, trying to scare you into backing down." "But my sister," Natasha whispered. "Will be protected," Victor said firmly. "I have a 12-person security team surrounding her building as we speak. Brennan can't touch her, but we need to move fast. He knows we're coming for him now, which means we have maybe 48 hours before he tries to disappear early." Natasha took a shaky breath, forcing herself to think past the fear. "What's our next move?" Victor's expression shifted into something calculating and dangerous. "We have 2 approaches, legal and permanent. The legal route, we leak everything to the FBI and media, force public investigation. It's clean but slow, and there's a chance he could still wriggle free through lawyers and technicalities. And the permanent route," Natasha asked quietly, "means he never threatens anyone ever again," Victor said. "But it requires accepting that I operate outside the law in ways that can't be undone. If I handle Brennan permanently, you need to be okay with what that means about me. About us." Natasha thought about her sister in danger, about 47 other women whose lives Brennan had violated, about the likelihood that the legal system would actually deliver justice given his resources and connections. She met Victor's eyes squarely. "Do both. Build the legal case so the other victims get justice and his buyers face consequences. But make sure he can never hurt anyone again, whatever that takes." Something flickered in Victor's expression, a mix of respect and concern. "You understand what you're asking me to do?" "I understand that some monsters don't deserve second chances," Natasha said firmly. "I understand that the system failed your mother and failed those 2 women who tried to report him. I understand that sometimes the only way to protect people is to eliminate the threat completely. And I can live with that, Victor. As long as my sister is safe and those other women get justice. Victor pulled her close, kissing her forehead. You're remarkable. Most people couldn't reconcile both approaches. Can't accept that sometimes justice requires getting your hands dirty. I'm learning to live in the gray areas, Natasha said against his chest. You taught me that there's more than just black and white. That protecting people sometimes means doing things that society says are wrong. Victor's phone buzzed again with updates from his team. He read them quickly, then looked at Natasha with grim satisfaction. Your sister is secure. My people have eyes on her 24/7. And Dmitri has finished analyzing Brennan's files. We have enough evidence to put him away for decades, multiple felonies, hundreds of victims beyond the 47 we identified. The FBI will have no choice but to act. And the permanent solution, Natasha asked. We move on that in 72 hours, right before his scheduled flight. He'll think he's getting away. But he won't make it to the airport, Victor said. His tone left no room for doubt about what that meant. Natasha should have been horrified, should have been questioning every choice that had led to this moment. Instead, she felt a fierce satisfaction at the idea of Brennan facing real consequences for what he'd done. I'm in this with you, she said. All the way. Victor's arms tightened around her. Then let's finish this. Together. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of coordinated planning. Victor had contacts everywhere, including within the FBI, and he used every resource at his disposal to build an airtight case against Brennan. Natasha watched him work with cold efficiency, making calls and coordinating multiple moving pieces, seeing clearly the dangerous man he'd been before she met him. But when he looked at her, when he reached for her hand during tense moments, she also saw the man he was becoming for her. Someone who could walk in both worlds, who could be lethal when necessary, but gentle when it mattered. On the morning of Brennan's scheduled flight, Victor's FBI contact confirmed that multiple agents were ready to execute simultaneous raids on Brennan's office, home, and the private airstrip where his charter was scheduled to depart. The evidence Natasha and Victor had gathered would be delivered anonymously, giving the FBI everything they needed for a bulletproof case. But Victor had other plans for before those raids began. You should stay here with Rosa, he said as he prepared to leave the penthouse. This last part isn't something you need to witness. Natasha shook her head firmly. I'm coming with you. I need to face him, Victor. I need him to see that he didn't break me. Victor's jaw tightened. Natasha, what's going to happen at that airstrip? It's not something you can unsee. I'm going to do things that will confirm every dark suspicion you've ever had about me. I know, she said quietly. And I'm still coming. You said I was brave. Let me be brave enough to see this through to the end. They stared at each other for a long moment before Victor finally nodded, resignation and respect warring in his expression. Stay in the car until I say it's safe. Please. The private airstrip was 40 minutes outside Chicago, a small facility used by wealthy individuals who wanted to avoid commercial airports. Victor's team had already confirmed that Brennan had arrived early, nervous and paranoid, with 3 suitcases and a briefcase that likely contained his backup files. Victor parked the SUV out of sight, then turned to Natasha. Give me 10 minutes. I need to secure the situation before you come out. She nodded, watching as he and Dmitri moved toward the hangar where Brennan's plane waited. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. 8 minutes later, her phone buzzed with a text from Victor. Safe. Come to Hangar 2. Natasha climbed out of the SUV on shaking legs and walked across the tarmac. The morning sun was just rising, painting everything in shades of gold and pink that felt wrong for what was about to happen. Inside the hangar, she found Dr. Richard Brennan on his knees, his hands zip-tied behind his back. Victor stood over him with cold fury, while Dmitri and 2 other men secured the perimeter. The pilot who'd been scheduled to fly Brennan was sitting against the wall, clearly wanting no part of whatever was happening. Brennan's eyes widened when he saw Natasha. He snarled. This is your fault. I gave you quality medical care. I was professional, and you repay me by sicking this criminal on me? Natasha felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. You photographed me without real consent. You sold intimate images of me to strangers. You did it to at least 47 women that we know of. You threatened my sister. And you call that professional? Brennan's face twisted with contempt. Those consent forms were legally binding. Everything I did was technically within the law. You're just too naive to understand how business works. Business, Victor said, his voice deadly quiet. You call exploiting vulnerable women business? He crouched down to Brennan's level, and Natasha saw the doctor flinch away from the cold fury in Victor's expression. I've done a lot of terrible things in my life, Victor continued. But I've never violated someone's trust the way you did. I've never preyed on the vulnerable under the guise of helping them. You're the worst kind of predator, Dr. Brennan. The kind that hides behind respectability. Brennan tried to bluster. You can't do anything to me. The FBI will find you. You'll go to prison for kidnapping, for assault, for whatever you're planning. I have lawyers, I have connections. Victor smiled, and it was the most dangerous expression Natasha had ever seen. Your connections won't help you. In about 20 minutes, the FBI is going to raid your office and find evidence of your crimes. Your buyers are going to be exposed. Your associate Dennis Coughlin has already flipped on you to save himself. And your victims, all 47 of them plus the hundreds more we found in your files, they're going to get justice. The color drained from Brennan's face. You're lying. Victor pulled out his phone and showed him something. Evidence logs. FBI case numbers. Media alerts ready to publish. It's over, Dr. Brennan. Your operation is finished, your reputation is destroyed, and you're going to prison for a very long time. Then why are we here? Brennan asked, his voice shaking now. Why not just let the FBI take me? Because prison isn't enough, Victor said simply. Because men like you find ways to work the system, to delay trials, to maybe eventually get out on technicalities. And I promised Natasha that you would never hurt anyone ever again. Natasha watched as realization dawned on Brennan's face, fear replacing his arrogance. Victor stood and turned to her. Natasha, say what you need to say to him. Then go back to the car. She stepped closer, looking down at the man who'd violated her trust so completely. I trusted you, she said quietly. I came to you for help, and you exploited that trust in the most intimate way possible. You made me doubt myself, made me feel dirty and ashamed. But you know what, Dr. Brennan? You didn't break me. You made me stronger. You made me realize that I'm capable of fighting back, of demanding justice, of refusing to be a victim. So thank you for that. And goodbye. She turned and walked away, her head high, leaving Victor to finish what needed to be done. Back in the SUV, Natasha waited with her hands clenched in her lap. She heard voices, then a single gunshot that echoed across the empty airstrip. Her breath caught, but she didn't feel horror. She felt relief and righteous satisfaction and a strange sense of closure. Victor returned 5 minutes later, his expression grim but satisfied. Dmitri was with him, already on the phone arranging cleanup. Victor slid into the driver's seat and looked at Natasha carefully. Are you okay? He asked quietly. Yes, she said, and meant it. Is he? He'll never hurt anyone again, Victor confirmed. The FBI will find him in his plane, an apparent suicide. He left a detailed confession note taking responsibility for his crimes and naming his accomplices. It'll give the other victims the closure they need without the trauma of a trial. And us? Natasha asked. Are we safe? We were never here, Victor said. My team will ensure all evidence points to suicide driven by guilt and impending exposure. The FBI will close the case satisfied. The media will have their story, and the victims will get justice. They drove in silence for a while, Natasha processing what had just happened, what she'd chosen to be part of. Finally, Victor reached over and took her hand. I'm sorry you had to see that, he said. I'm not, Natasha replied. I needed to face him. Needed to see that he wasn't invincible, that he could be held accountable. And I needed to know that you would do what had to be done to protect me and those other women. Victor brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. You're the strongest person I've ever met, Natasha Chun. The next week was a whirlwind of controlled chaos. News broke about Dr. Richard Brennan's death and the discovery of his extensive criminal operation. The FBI confirmed they'd found evidence of systematic exploitation of female patients, with files on hundreds of women. Dennis Coughlin was arrested attempting to flee the country. Multiple prominent men on Brennan's buyer list were investigated, several facing charges. Most importantly, the victims started coming forward, anonymous at first, then some publicly, sharing their stories and thanking the unidentified whistleblower who'd exposed the operation. Natasha read every testimonial, cried over each woman's story, felt the weight of collective trauma begin to lift as justice was finally served. Miranda called her a week after Brennan's death, voice shaking. "Did you hear what happened? About Dr. Brennan?" "Natasha, we went to the same doctor. I had photos taken too. I trusted him." "I know," Natasha said quietly. "Are you okay?" "I think so," Miranda said. "The FBI contacted me. They said all the photos are being destroyed under court order. No one will see them. It's finally over." After they hung up, Natasha sat in Victor's office and let herself feel the full weight of what they'd accomplished. Not just for her, but for hundreds of women who'd been violated and silenced. Victor found her there an hour later, tears streaming down her face. She looked up at him, this dangerous man who'd become her protector, her partner, her love. "It's really over," she said. "It's really over," he confirmed, pulling her into his arms. "You did this, Natasha. Your courage to confront him, to work with me, to refuse to be silenced. You gave all those women their power back. We did it together," she corrected. 2 weeks after Brennan's death, Victor took Natasha back to the rooftop restaurant where they'd had their first real date. The city spread out below them, beautiful and vast, and Natasha felt lighter than she had in months. "I have something to tell you," Victor said over dessert. "I finalized my exit from the organization this week. All my businesses are completely legitimate now. Security consulting, real estate investment, nothing that operates in gray areas anymore." Natasha's breath caught. "Victor, you didn't have to do that for me." "I did it for us," he corrected. "I want to build a life with you, Natasha. A real life, where you don't have to worry about my past catching up with us. Where any children we might have don't grow up questioning what their father does. You've made me want to be better, and I'm finally becoming that person." Tears pricked her eyes. "I'm so proud of you." Victor stood and moved to kneel beside her chair. Natasha's heart started racing as she realized what was happening. "Natasha Chun," he said, pulling out a small velvet box. "You walked into my life during the worst possible circumstances, and somehow you saw past the danger to the man I could be. You made me believe I was worth redemption. You're the bravest, strongest, most compassionate person I've ever met, and I want to spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt your own worth again. Will you marry me?" He opened the box to reveal a stunning ring, elegant and simple, exactly her taste. "Yes," Natasha said without hesitation, joy flooding through her. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Victor slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a tenderness that made her forget they were in a public space. When they finally broke apart, both were smiling through tears. "I love you," Natasha whispered. "I love you too," Victor said. "Thank you for trusting me when you had every reason not to. Thank you for seeing who I could be." They were married 6 weeks later in a small ceremony at the penthouse, with Rosa crying happily and Dmitri serving as Victor's best man. Natasha's sister Lily flew in from Seattle, healthy and safe under Victor's ongoing protection, and gave her blessing with genuine happiness. Natasha wore a simple white dress and carried roses from Rosa's garden. Victor looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. When they exchanged vows, promising to protect and cherish each other through whatever came, Natasha felt the last pieces of her broken trust finally healing. 6 months into their marriage, Natasha stood in her new office at the physical therapy clinic she'd opened with Victor's support, looking at the framed photos on her desk. Her wedding day, Rosa in the kitchen teaching her to make Victor's favorite meal, Lily visiting for Christmas, a life rebuilt from ashes. Her phone buzzed with a reminder for her annual checkup. But this time, she was seeing Dr. Sarah Morrison, a female physician she'd carefully researched and chosen herself. Victor had offered to come with her if she wanted, but Natasha had assured him she would be fine. She drove to the appointment with confidence, checked in without anxiety, and sat in the examination room feeling powerful rather than vulnerable. Dr. Morrison was professional and kind, explaining everything before she did it, asking permission for every step. When the exam was over and Natasha was dressed again, Dr. Morrison smiled at her. "Everything looks great. You're healthy," and she checked her notes. "Congratulations on the pregnancy." Natasha's breath caught. "I'm pregnant. About 8 weeks," Dr. Morrison confirmed. "Did you not know?" "I suspected, but I wasn't sure," Natasha said, her hand moving instinctively to her stomach. "A baby. She and Victor were going to have a baby." She left the office in a daze of happiness and found Victor waiting for her in the parking lot, leaning against his car exactly as he'd promised he would be. "Everything okay?" he asked, searching her face. "Everything's perfect," Natasha said, moving into his arms. "Victor, we're going to have a baby." She felt him go completely still, then his arms tightened around her almost painfully. "Truly?" "Truly," she confirmed, laughing through sudden tears. Victor pulled back to cup her face, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "A family. We're going to be a family." "We already are," Natasha said. "But yes, we're expanding it." As they drove home together, Natasha reflected on the impossible journey that had brought her here. 6 months ago, she'd been violated and terrified, her trust shattered, her sense of safety destroyed. She'd walked into a room and seen her worst nightmare made real. But she'd also met a man who'd shown her that trust could be rebuilt, that power could be reclaimed, that justice could be demanded. Victor had protected her, believed in her, loved her enough to change his entire life. More importantly, she'd discovered her own strength. The courage to fight back, to demand accountability, to refuse to be silenced or shamed. She'd helped bring down a predator and given dozens of women their voices back. Now she was married to the love of her life, opening the practice she'd always dreamed of, and carrying their child. The photos Brennan had taken were destroyed. The other victims were healing and moving forward. And Natasha had transformed from victim to survivor to warrior. That evening, she stood in the penthouse Victor had once offered as a safe house and now was truly home, looking out at the Chicago skyline with Victor's arms around her and his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach where their child grew. If you're watching this and you've ever had someone violate your trust, whether it was a doctor, a partner, a person in power, I want you to know something, Natasha said quietly, though she was really thinking it to herself. You are not broken. You are not weak. And you are allowed to demand justice in whatever form that takes for you. Trust can be rebuilt, but only on your terms, with people who prove they deserve it. And sometimes the strongest thing you can do is accept help from unexpected places, even when it scares you. Victor pressed a kiss to her temple. "Any regrets?" he asked softly. "Not a single one," Natasha said, turning in his arms to face him. "You saved my life in every way that matters." "You saved mine too," Victor said. "You made me remember that there's more to life than power and protection. There's purpose. There's love. There's building something real instead of just destroying threats." Their future stretched ahead of them, full of possibility and promise. A legitimate business, a growing family, a life built on trust hard-won and fiercely protected. The violation that had brought them together no longer defined Natasha. Instead, she was defined by her strength, her courage, and her refusal to let anyone make her feel powerless ever again. She'd walked into Dr. Brennan's office trusting and vulnerable. She'd walked out of that chapter of her life powerful and loved. And that transformation, she knew, was worth every terrifying moment it had taken to achieve. As Victor pulled her close and they stood together watching their city, Natasha felt complete in a way she'd never imagined possible. This was what healing looked like. This was what justice felt like. This was what it meant to reclaim yourself and build something beautiful from the broken pieces. And she'd never been more grateful for the courage to trust again, even when everything said she shouldn't. Because sometimes the most dangerous man in the room was actually the safest place to fall.